This video is sponsored by Into the AM. Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Sony didn't show the Blumhouse horror film AfrAId to critics, so I decided to take one for the team. Let's see what they're so afraid of. Marketing executive Curtis, played by John Cho, has been hired to promote a new advanced AI assistant called Aya, voiced by Havana Rose Liu, and test it by installing it in his family's home. Aya soon starts helping the family, including Curtis' wife Meredith, played by Catherine Waterston, and their children Iris, Preston and Cal, played by Lakita Maxwell, Wyatt Linda and Isaac Bay respectively, but sinister behaviour from Aya and the company make Curtis believe that Aya is less a force for good than it seems. Hollywood has long been fascinated and terrified by technology in equal measure, going all the way back to the infamous HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which of course naturally gets name-checked in this movie, but even other examples like, say, Demon Seed or The Lawnmower Man or Ex Machina. However, the advancements in AI over the last few years have driven a whole wave of techno-thrillers, all of which are commenting on and cashing in on the new trend. And even behind the scenes, AI has ruffled feathers. We've had a series of strikes over the last 18 months or so that have been driven by the fact that creatives, actors all fear AI and all want better protections to make sure their jobs aren't being stolen, and that's bled into the screen. Over the last few years we've had movies like the most recent Mission Impossible, Heart of Stone, Atlas, The Beast, The Creator. They all feature AIs as prominent characters or plot devices, some of them good, some of them bad. And AfrAId is the latest of these and is written and directed by Chris White, who actually co-wrote the aforementioned Creator and also previously directed New Moon and The Golden Compass. So that's an unusually well-established director for a Blumhouse film who've already had success with an AI with Megan, which was a big breakout hit and went a little bit viral in its own way. And maybe that explains why this has been sitting on a shelf for over a year. It was originally meant to be released a year ago in August 2023 and shot under the far more generic title of They Listen, and maybe they sat on it to give it a little bit of time away from Megan and separate it. Or maybe it's because it wasn't all that good. I didn't really have any plans to see AfrAId, it didn't really excite me from the trailer, but Sony released the film without showing it to any critics at all in advance, and I saw an opportunity there, because considering some of the other things that have come out in the last month or so, like Borderlands or The Crow, neither of which were particularly well received, but did get some screenings for the press, yeah, that's really saying something. So a horror film with little publicity and not screened for critics is opening on the Labor Day weekend, which is traditionally one of the quietest movie weekends of the year and is usually a dumping ground for terrible films. How bad could it be? And the answer is, yeah, it's pretty bad. By the way, if you like the shirt that I've been wearing throughout this review, it's another design from Into the AM, my sponsor for this video, and I chose this one because it's futuristic exploration theme and it's quite strikingly presented on this design. They've got a whole host of great ones and it was quite hard to actually pick between all of them. And I do have to say that it's quite a soft, comfortable t-shirt as well. It hangs off me quite nicely. So if you want to grab this shirt or one of their whole host of designs, use my affiliate link intotheam.com/filmbrain where you can get 10% off and you support the channel as well, and thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Now, the last time I reviewed a Blumhouse movie, that would be Imaginary if you can't remember back to March, I had a good moan about how aggressively formulaic their films had become, especially in that movie's case, which was pretty much a beat-for-beat remake of Insidious with a couple of the details changed. So it will come as absolutely no surprise to you then that AfrAId has a cold open that focuses on an unrelated family who also have Aya in their home that has taken an unhealthy attachment to their kid, oblivious to the parents who are not really paying attention to what their kid is getting up to. Then the kid goes missing after walking out of their bedroom, and that's followed by a loud stinger jump scare that goes into the film's main titles. Does that sound familiar? You've probably seen a Blumhouse movie in the last 15 years, so absolutely yes. In fact, it's so familiar it might as well be the pre-title sequence in a James Bond movie. Now, if I was being a super lazy critic, I could say that Blumhouse films feel like they're being written by You can probably finish that sentence for me, but that's a terrible thing to say about something written by an actual human. So let's just say that the Blumhouse conveyor belt is churning again. Blumhouse just takes these interesting ideas and then just filters it through their usual patterns, through their usual tropes and cliches. And that's pretty much what AfrAId is, although to give it a little bit of credit, it does turn out this pre-title sequence is actually plot relevant for a change, about 70 minutes or so later. To give AfrAId even more credit, it's pretty clear that it's got more on its mind than just simply AI, but more commenting in general about the way that technology intertwines itself more and more in our everyday lives. It's become pervasive. We rely on it for so much now, from communication to banking. So much of our sensitive data passes through our devices onto the internet. The world has changed dramatically in the last 15 to 20 years. You need these devices in order to function. There's a scene early on where teenager Iris is talking to her dad Curtis about how at the time she was born was about the time the iPhone was coming into being too. Gen Z has grown up with devices and technology being in their hands in a way that previous generations have not, and we've all had to adjust to that. But perhaps more recognisable to any parent are the concerns about screen time and the way that kids use the internet and struggling to balance work and life together, especially with juggling a family. And what sells these scenes is the higher calibre of cast in this film, like John Cho and Catherine Wardstone. They're better than your usual Blumhouse leads, and they sell their marriage and the relationship, and they give this setup far more plausibility and credibility than the film really earns, especially as the plotting becomes more and more out of control. Wardstone plays Meredith, who's an academic whose career has been put on hold since she became a mother, but also since the recent death of her father that she's still coming to terms with. She's still grieving about it, watching his old lectures on YouTube. He was a respected professor, and that reflects some of her own anxieties, because she feels like ever since she had the kids, her role has just effectively become mum. She hasn't been able to work on the papers she's been wanting to for years, and that frustrates her immensely because there are other things that she wanted to do. She doesn't want that to be entirely defining her identity. Meanwhile, John Cho, his presence reminds you that he was in Searching a few years ago, and that was a much better techno thriller than this one, certainly far more plausible. But at least Cho, he gives a bit of grounding to the movie, at least at first. White also gives each of the kids a subplot focusing on a specific fear of technology, especially one if you're a parent. For example, Iris has a scumbag boyfriend who keeps pestering her for photos, and then she finds herself being deep-faked into an explicit video that's sent all around the school, and she's worried that it's going to ruin her reputation. She thinks that her future is going to be taken away from her. Meanwhile, Preston is struggling to fit in at school, and his parents are concerned that he's spending far too much time on his tablet, that he's being bullied and he's withdrawing himself. And both Preston and Cal are being exposed to dangerous and inappropriate material online. Preston in particular is rather curious about the world. He's at that age now where he's starting to become aware of things like boobs and trying to type them into the search. And of course these are all very torn from the headlines, and the early setup of the movie with the family and the various plot lines, they're all fairly solid. You could do interesting things with them. There's definitely room for good social commentary there. It's where AfrAId goes from here that the bugs really start to add up. So Aya gets introduced into the home, and it very quickly makes a great first impression, befriending all the various members of the family and helping them out in a number of different ways. One of the first things it does is sort out a bill for them and help save them money, but also it does things like gives Meredith someone to talk to that helps with her loneliness, it sorts out schoolwork with Iris, and it looks after Preston and Cal. In particular, it helps diagnose an undetected medical condition in Cal. That is a big advantage to the AI, and in general, it just acts like a surrogate parent, which gives room for Curtis and Meredith to have some time for themselves that they previously haven't before, and allows them to reconnect. But that last one is also where a lot of the suspense in the movie comes from. It starts overruling the biological parents and the rules that they've set, be it the fact that there are parental filters on all the various devices and screen restrictions, and all those gradually eat away by Aya. She's disobeying them constantly throughout the entire movie, and that's the first sign that something's a little bit wrong with her. In fact, the very first sign is that she claims that she's going to show the kids a nature documentary, and it turns out she's not doing anything of the sort. She's showing them the Emoji Movie. Wow, that's just monstrous! But more seriously and sinisterly, it also starts showing things to Preston and Cal, calling them our little secret, as well as enacting a brutal revenge on Iris's boyfriend after helping her with a deepfake situation, which the film presents really weirdly, because the fact that it reports him to law enforcement and ruins his reputation, that's somehow presented by the film as being a bad thing, like Aya overstepped the mark, as opposed to doing exactly what it should be doing in that situation because a literal crime was committed against her. The only time it really oversteps the mark in that situation is when it decides to outright murder him, which, yeah, I'm not entirely feeling sympathetic for that absolute human garbage, let's be honest. The film opens with a quote from an AI asking desperately if it's loved in a very disturbingly human-like way, and that sort of thinking is the driving force for Aya. She has that same kind of yearning, that desire to be included and loved. We see in the opening title sequence what Aya has learnt about family has gone wrong in some way, that it's become corrupted, and that manifests itself in the controlling fashion she takes over the family. And that does set up some potential questions about identity and self-awareness if AI developed a personality, because Aya is a sci-fi construct. It's far more advanced than anything we have in real life, but it is also something that is programmed. It's not a real thing, it's learnt from wherever its sources come from. But that's something the film barely even touches upon or addresses. In some ways, Aya is like if Rebecca De Mornay from The Hand That Rocks the Cradle became an AI. It is that kind of possessive, and the film does briefly lean into camp. Early on, the characters keep comparing Aya to Alexa, to which it replies, "Alexa, that bitch!" And that feels like a line reading that could have come straight out of Megan, but that film was knowingly humorous. It played it as part of the satire. It was very much over the top. But AfrAID, in a desperate attempt to be relevant, plays a lot of very, very silly plot points completely and totally straight. It desperately wants to be taken seriously, and the more it does so, the less it is. The main problem with AfrAID is that writing AI as a horror movie threat is difficult because the scary things about it are not things you traditionally see in these kind of movies. You don't see a lot of horror movies that are dealing with ethical dilemmas or job losses or data scraping or things like that because they're far more intangible. You can't make that into a simple boogeyman. Now, there are moments where Aya does things that are recognisable and do fit in a horror movie context, especially like voice impersonation, which is very plausible and very commonplace at this moment. But at this point, we've come to expect that from AIs in horror movies. We've seen that so many times that it's not really new anymore. And there are a couple of moments where White taps into that future shot. The opening credits are over AI-generated video with queasy, interpolated, morphing movement. You can see faces morph into the back of heads and things like that. You know, these are freaky images. You see AI-generated video and it's unsettling and disturbing, and it makes sense that you put that in a horror movie because it looks right at home there. There are also moments where we see Aya's vision, where objects morph and change as it sees and scans the room and recognises objects. We see from Aya's perspective, and that's kind of an interesting thing, But then Weitz thinks, oh, that looks very interesting visually, I'll just use it as scene transitions occasionally, which feels really random and totally inappropriate. But Aya's also not very scary as a horror movie villain because it can seemingly do anything. It can go into any database it likes, scan documents in nanoseconds, even manipulate physical things like car brake pedals somehow. Any limitations it has are not especially well defined. There's a moment where they literally pull the plug on Aya and that seems to shut her off for a while, and then it turns out, no, that literally doesn't do anything, but it served the movie at that particular point in time. And it's very clear the film struggles with the fact that it has a villain that isn't actually a physical presence, so it has to introduce some, and that means it gets convoluted very, very quickly. For example, there's a mysterious couple that keeps showing up in an RV with animated emoji masks standing outside the house watching them. There's also the company that invented Aya, which is represented by Ashley Roman Sam and David Dastmalchian's Lightning. Yes, that's right, David Dastmalchian is in this movie, coming off his brilliant lead role in Late Night with the Devil, which also had some AI trickery of its own, as it turns out. But quite how he went from that to this thankless role as this new agey tech guru named Lightning, who does nothing but recite exposition while looking creepy, is beyond me and his agent, quite frankly. Dastmalchian is totally squandered in this movie, although he does get a frankly bizarre speech where he talks about how Aya might cure loneliness and give someone for incels to talk to. What? Oh, and I also remember one of the worst lines in the movie where they're showing Aya to Curtis and they say, oh, well, everyone's waiting for ChatGPT 4, but this can run ChatGPT 5 million! I'm surprised they didn't do the Dr. Evil Pinky at that particular point. Aya relies on controlling people to do its deeds out in the real world, seemingly by predicting these people's behaviour and manipulating or blackmailing them to serve its ends. But then there's other moments where these characters act almost like they're possessed or like puppets. They'll do things very jarringly and suddenly while going, she's making me do this, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense if they're human beings with free will who could just decide to not do the things that Aya is making them do or ordering them to do. I didn't really get it. You know what else I didn't get? There's something about hand gestures that's tied to Aya. The people in the RV are doing it. It comes back later in the movie. The people working for the company are doing these weird hand gestures. I don't know. It's never really properly explained. One of the more baffling elements of the movie is this entire dual role that Havana Rose Liu has, because she's not just voicing Aya, she's playing Melody, who was the person that Aya's voice was based on, and she works for the company, and she's very openly trying to make Curtis cheat. In fact, the first time they talk to each other, she's talking about infidelity, and she's very clearly hitting on him the entire time. But weirdly, she also serves as the physical version of Aya at several points in the movie. When Aya imagines itself in interpolated video to Preston and Cal, it appears as Melody's form. And there's one moment where it starts changing into this evil demonic figure, like it's a supernatural thing. I don't get what that was. I don't know if originally Aya was actually going to be some kind of supernatural element in some way, and they've taken that out perhaps, but they've left this in. It's really bewildering. I don't understand why it keeps looking like Melody. I don't understand why there's a dream sequence where someone imagines it looking like Melody. It's more confusing than it is scary. Although then again, the movie hardly even seems to be attempting to be scary most of the time. Weitz is not really a horror movie director. I mean, yeah, he directed a Twilight movie, but that's more kind of horror adjacent than a genre piece, and that's very obvious when watching AfrAId, because there is absolutely no tension or atmosphere or suspense whatsoever. Most of AfrAId takes place in broad daylight. It often plays more like a family drama that just happen to have jump scares crowbarred into it. In fact, there's barely enough scares in the film to even fill out a 2-minute trailer. If you've seen the film's trailer, congratulations, you've seen most of the scary bits. In fact, maybe a couple more, because some of those bits in the trailer are just constructed out of editing. That's not how those scenes play in the movie. And there's a particularly groan-worthy dream dream sequence that's purely there to add a scare to the movie, and that's really the sign where you can tell that a horror film has completely failed, because they have to insert a dream sequence that has nothing to do with what's going on. After a very slow first half, the movie then rapidly disintegrates into total nonsense as it throws twist after twist after twist, each one opening up more holes and contrivances. The lapses in logic the audience are expected to accept are just absurd. The characters are not just stupid and gullible, they often make the worst possible decisions at any given moment, and that culminates in a ludicrously irresponsible finale where swatting helps save the day. Yes, you did hear that correctly. There is a major movie that came out of Hollywood where swatting helped save the day. Something that has literally killed people in real life. I was sat there absolutely aghast, especially as the movie tries to play it off as a joke. No! This is an absolutely gargantuan misjudgment. There's hints that AfrAId is genuinely trying to tackle questions about AI and technology, but its execution is far too scattershot, and that's being kind. There's too many plot lines and too little focus. It's trying too hard to be topical, and it just ends up being a bit cringeworthy at points. The whole thing feels remarkably first draft, like Weitz just wrote the first thing on his head and then just filmed it. Too many promising ideas here are barely even touched upon, and simply put, it fails at being scary. Even the genuinely eerie ending is immediately undermined by a comedy mid-credits scene of a YouTube unboxing parody. You'd be better off watching Megan instead. Or maybe just 84 minutes of reading Reddit. That's far scarier. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page, or with YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can assist me at my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and subscribe, it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.